Also, spoiler alert, I am filming this like directly after the last video that you probably saw. But I'm wearing a bandana, so it's totally different, it's fine. Hello everyone and welcome back. That was very woo! Let's go with it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Hope you're having a great day, a great start to 2022. This is like probably my third, I say probably, it's going to be my third video of the year. So I don't know why I'm only now being like, yay, 2022. Or maybe I did that in my first video. I can't remember. It's been a mental life. Today, I want to talk about Arts Council funding and my story with Arts Council funding. If you're not aware, last year I applied for some funding and I got granted it. So I'm currently in the midst of the project that I got funding for. I'm not going to talk too much about that because it's a personal project. It's not like I'm going to be making something to be like, hey guys, come and see this. But that whole process was insane and long and so far rewarding, and I just thought it'd be really interesting to share some of what I've learned and some of my experience going through that with you guys, especially those of you who are in the UK, who are actors, who are thinking about, you know, maybe wanting to put on your own work, wanting to kind of change up your skill sets, things like that, but have no experience, as I didn't, of applying for any funding, let alone from the Arts Council. I did also write an article about how to apply for funding, which kind of has step by step, not so much like a how to like holding you by the hand, but just like things to think about, important steps to consider when you're doing your first application based on my experience. I wrote that for Spotlight, so I will link that below if you want a step by step, like this is how I did it. This is going to be kind of more of a chat. There's going to be a bit of advice like that, but also I'm going to be sharing kind of my own experience going through that process. So if you're interested, keep on watching. Show of the week this week is going to be the producers, because producers need to get funding for shows, so it ties in. Yeah, don't do what the producers did with your Arts Council funding. That would be bad. Although actually the whole story of the producers is that the show ends up going really well and they make loads of money and they're like, oh crap. So maybe do, but do that deliberately. Anyway, I will link to the cast recording in the description for you to check out. So have fun with that. So just a bit of a background for those of you who don't know what the Arts Council is. So Arts Council England is a body that is the Arts Council for England, obviously. I think there's quite a lot of people who watch my channel who aren't from like the UK or Britain or England. So just to explain to you guys, England is one of the countries within the United Kingdom, which is made up of 4 countries, which is England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, different from the Republic of Ireland, that's its own separate country. So Arts Council England just does funding for England within the UK. And they offer lots of different types of funding. So for example, they are the body that has issued the Cultural Recovery Fund for buildings, creative buildings or creative companies that have been impacted by COVID. There's also a benevolent fund for creative freelancers who are in need. But the 2 grants that I'm going to be focusing on, because one of them is kind of the most well known and the other one is the one I applied for, are the National Lottery Project Grant. So that is a grant for if you have a show that you want to workshop or put on somewhere and you need to like pay people and pay for the venue and everything, that's the grant that you apply for. Or there's the Developing Your Creative Practice Grant, which is if you're wanting to develop your creative practice. So you don't necessarily have a show or a project for public display that you're working on, but you just want to get better at the thing that you do, or change direction on the thing that you do, or build up contacts so you can better do the thing that you do. So I knew about the Arts Council. I think most people have heard of the Arts Council if you work in the performing arts or any of the creative arts, because it's not just for performing arts, it's also visual arts, I think Britain Arts as well. There's also separate funds for like museums and things. So I knew about the Arts Council, and I knew that particularly producers tend to get on board when it comes to Arts Council applications for the National Lottery project grants. It's kind of like part of your job as a producer to know how to do funding applications, especially if you're working in the subsidised sector, which obviously the Arts Council deals with. Because the Arts Council is also the council that funds like the National Theatre, and I think also the Royal Opera House gets subsidy. I think maybe English National Opera gets subsidy. Like all of the big creative powerhouses, they get funding because it's like, we're doing this cultural thing, which then gets interesting when they have commercial successes. It's like, okay, so does that money go back into the building, or is that just kept as like, how does that work? But that's a video for another day. Yeah, so I knew about Arts Council funding, but I never thought that as an actor, unless I had a show, I could, you know, apply for funding. And I've wanted to make my own work for like a while. I think for many actors, speaking from not only my own experience, from actors who I know personally and seeing what other actors have done, I think a lot of actors can sometimes get to a point where it feels, just purely acting on its own can feel very, I don't think stilted is the right word, but you can feel like you don't have a lot of creative control over your career, because a lot of it depends on what auditions you can get and whether those auditions are successful, and there isn't like a clear trajectory. And that's all things that is kind of part and parcel of the job. There is no clear trajectory, you know, it is what opportunities come your way or what opportunities you can make for yourself. But I think from a creative standpoint, I think many people, myself included, can feel like, I want to feel like I have more creative agency. And obviously, loving performing arts, it makes sense to want to, you know, maybe try writing work, or maybe look into directing work, which I know someone who's been looking into that. Or if you're more of a dancer, looking into choreography, wanting to branch out into spheres where you can have a bit more creative agency and you're not needing someone to give you a job to be able to be creative. Yes, putting on a show or putting on a dance piece is one thing, but it doesn't stop you from writing it or choreographing it or composing it if music's more your thing. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's kind of where I'd been for a while, and I'd been having some creative career coaching, which was really, really helpful. I've been looking into what free resources that I could find that I felt I was able to utilize, but I didn't feel like I had much direction in that. It was kind of just like grasping at straws. It felt like I was considering doing a writing master's, but there were pros to cons to that. Firstly, like the debt. Secondly, especially with creative writing courses, it depending on the remit of the course, they're not necessarily teaching you how to write. It can be more critiquing and kind of more academic. And whilst I'm not against academia, like I quite like learning and stuff, so if there was a course that I felt passionately that I wanted to do, like I wouldn't be like, oh no, it's too much essay writing or something like that. That isn't what I wanted. I wanted to learn how to write for stage. I've never written for stage before. I don't know the technique of it. Then I did Josephine in the spring. It's a play about Josephine Baker, and I loved that show, and I think I got a lot from it. But one of the things I got from it is when we were in Bath for the 2 weeks to tech the show and film it, myself, the two other actors and our stage manager, we were all staying in shared accommodation. They'd provided accommodation for us. Just one day in the kitchen, Amanita, who was playing the titular role of Josephine Baker, and our stage manager Jess were talking about Arts Council funding because they'd both applied. And that's when I learned about the Developing Your Creative Practice grant, the DYCP. That was like the end of April, beginning of May. And yeah, it kind of went from there. So the great thing about the Developing Your Creative Practice grant, the DYCP, I'm gonna say DYCP because that's just such a long name. The great thing about the DYCP is that whereas with the project grants, you need to like have a show. It doesn't necessarily have to be completely finished. It doesn't have to be like, oh, this is a show that's going to be put on at this theatre for the public. It can be a workshopped thing, but you need to have a show, an idea, to the point where you can be thinking about casting and budget and all of that stuff. With the DYCP, it's like, if you want to get to that place, you can apply. When I first heard about this grant, I thought it was so amazing that, like, me as an actor, because actors can apply as long as what they're applying for and they want to do in their practice isn't just perform other people's work, it's having a creative role within the show. And I mean creative as in, like, they're creating the show or the piece. Obviously actors are creatives, but our creation comes in interpreting the work of other people, if that makes sense. Whereas the DYCP, you need to be creating something from scratch, if that makes sense. But I just thought it was great that, like, as an actor who's wanting to start on my journey to being able to do that, that I could actually get financial help with that and be able to not only pay myself to take time out to actually work, like do the work, but also being able to ask people for help and pay them for their time. Most of my grant, like money that I've been awarded, is going to pay other people, which A, feels great because I'm like, I can pay people, yay! But also is, I guess, good for the artistic community because people are getting paid for their time and it all gets fed back in, which is great. My personal development project, it focused mostly on writing. So there's a lot of writing mentoring, like I said, paying myself for my time. So not only the time that I'm being mentored, but also extra time so I can, you know, work on what I'm learning and, you know, write, and I'm being set homework by my mentor, so do my homework and all of those things. But it doesn't just have to be that. It can be taking time out to mentor for other things. So not just like learning a craft, but also, you know, just having a mentor to check in with. It can be money for networking, so paying to go to conferences, paying travel to go to certain places, paying for, you know, having the time to actually reach out and connect with people. Like I said, the article that I wrote, which I'll link below, which has further links in it to like the guidance and things, the guidance has everything that kind of comes under the remit of what can be funded. It doesn't just have to be like, I want to learn how to do this thing. It's a very competitive grant at the moment because of COVID. I think a lot of people have either had time to start thinking about, you know, other creative things they can do because they haven't been able to act because loads of shows have been cancelled. But I think also people have just been trying to look for what funding they can just to help them survive in this time. So it's a very competitive grant at the moment. But if you're interested in applying, it's done in rounds. So when I first found out about this grant, the round before the round I applied for, I think I applied for round 10 and that was round 9, I think. I can't remember the exact number, but that round had basically just opened. You get like a month to apply from when the round opens to when it closes. And it had literally just opened, which was great for me because I just heard about this application. The first round was so soon, like literally like it had just opened, that I was like, there's no way that I can think of a personal development project, find out all of the information that I need to be able to apply successfully, do a draft, get someone to look over it, get my supporting work together and submit it within a month. Like there's just no way. So I have to wait for the next round. But that meant that I had like 3 months to do my application, which was a godsend. I literally spent from March till, I think applications opened in September. No, it closed in September. It opened in August. So I had from the beginning of May to the end of August to do my application and submit it, which was great. It gave me enough time to actually think of a development project, because it's not just like, give me money to do this. You have to break down, first of all, your budget of how much money that you want. And secondly, you need what they call milestones. So basically just like proof that you're going to follow through on what you say by being like, by this point, I will have done this. So from an arts council perspective, it's like, yeah, she knows what she's doing. You need to know what your goal is and the steps you're going to take to do that and be able to demonstrate that in your application. But that takes time to think out. So figuring that out takes time, and figuring out a budget for that takes time, because you need to, if you know who you want to work with, contact them and ask them for quotes for their time, or just if they're available. Or if you don't have specific people in mind, then looking up what normal daily rates or weekly rates are, things like that. If you need any equipment, factoring that in, thinking about if you need to pay for any travel, thinking about what you think your contingency budget will be just in case things go over or there's unexpected costs, things like that. And that all takes time. Then there's the fact that you've got to actually write the application, which I think I went through 3 drafts of my application. Counting like the bullet points, I think it was 4. So there was the bullet point version where just for each of the paragraph sections I bullet pointed, obviously. Then I wrote it out in full, gave it to my creative mentor to like check for me, and they came back with some feedback, worked on that feedback, and then also just like tweaking certain things to make sure I was in the character count and things like that. So yeah, so I think in the end I did about 3 written drafts, 4 including the bullet point draft. The other thing that you also need is like supporting evidence. So I had written a few things before, like I'd written some monologues and some poetry and things. So that's what I submitted as my supporting evidence, because obviously my application was writing based. And then another supporting document. So it can be a letter of recommendation, which is what I did. Or it can be if you've put on things before, any reviews that you've had. My letter of recommendation was from someone who I've worked with a few times as an actor, but who I'd also shown some writing stuff to as well. So having the time to do all of that really, really helped. With the project funding, going back to that, if that's something that you're interested in, there aren't rounds. It's basically just you apply as and when, and then depending on how much money you need, the waiting time can be between, I think it's 6 and 13 weeks. I think it's like if you want under a certain amount, it's 6 weeks. If you want over a certain amount, it's 13 weeks just to wait for a decision, but you can apply whenever. So obviously depending on like, if you have your venue booked for this date or penciled for this date, then that gives you a time limit on how long you have to apply. But if you don't have those things kind of like marked in, especially if you know straight from the beginning of having this idea of like, we're putting on this show, we're gonna need funding, just thinking about it as early as possible to give yourself as much time, especially if you don't have an experienced producer on board who knows how to do the project grant applications successfully, someone who like knows the points you have to hit, knows the kind of language you need to use, and you know, that kind of stuff. If you're just doing it on your own and you don't have that experience, just give yourself as much time as possible. Even with the amount of time that I had, when it was coming down to like the round being open and me like trying to get it all done, it was stressful. So yeah, just give yourself time. While we're here, let's just get into top tips, kind of general tips that I would have having done my application successfully. Number 1, I've already said it, but just give yourself time, just as much time as you can. If you know what you want to do, but you know that you wouldn't really have time to do multiple drafts if needed and like get people to read through it, like someone who is good with, you know, written applications in general, bonus if it's Arts Council applications, to like read through your application and, you know, give you pointers or how you can improve it. Just wait to the next round, because especially if you apply successfully once, you can't apply again for the next round, at least the next round. It might even be the next 2. So like, now I've got this funding, I can't apply again, which is good. But also if you apply unsuccessfully twice, you can't apply for the next round. So you don't want to jump the gun and apply early, even though you don't have the time to literally do everything you can to make your application as strong as possible, because if that application is unsuccessful, then you'll just need to apply again. And if that application is unsuccessful, not because the application is bad because you've had more time, but let's say too many people have applied for a similar project that you have, and you're just unlucky that yours isn't chosen, you then can't apply again. You don't want to deliberately put yourself in that situation by applying before you're completely ready. It's frustrating, but just don't do it. Other advice, find people who have applied before, even if you just have to do a call out on Twitter or wherever to be like, hey, I'm applying for this. Is there anyone whose brains I can pick about it? I did that. I had a friend of mine, he's a visual artist and a poet, so discipline is different, but he'd applied successfully because I'd seen him say that, oh yeah, I got my DYCP funding. So I was like, hey, give me pointers. So he sent me his application, his successful application, so I could look at it. And he gave me some pointers about the things that he had in his project to kind of like help him, and the kind of help that he had that I could try and find. Someone who I know, who actually was my letter of recommendation, someone that he'd worked with had applied successfully. Again, actor, but also a writer, further ahead than me. They had written plays before, like one-act things, I think. But yeah, he put us in touch, and again, he sent me his successful application and gave me some pointers and stuff. So that was really, really useful. In terms of actually doing my application, my careers coach had helped previous applicants with their DYCP applications and other applications, so she was able to read through my application and give me pointers on how things are coming across and what points maybe it would be good to hit, things like that. You can be selective with the advice. For example, there was some advice I didn't take because I was happy with the project that I had in mind, and their advice was about what I could do in the project. It was quite late in the day. This was the kind of beginning of August time, so the application had just opened, and I didn't want to make big changes to my application because I've been working on it for so long, and making changes to the project could potentially mean that I had to make changes to the paragraphs, etc. And I had a busy August. I was doing a show, and then in the September I was going into another show. So I knew I wouldn't have the time to do it and get it really good. So I just let it go. So make sure that you're clear about what you want to do, I would say, so that when you get advice, you can take what's useful and leave what isn't. Also, get your budgeting and milestones really, really clear, because those are the things that, obviously I don't know this because I don't work for the Arts Council, but I can imagine if you're just looking at an application, if it looks like someone doesn't have clear milestones, so they're not going to know when they've achieved certain things, or if their budget just makes absolutely no sense, I think those are probably the first two things to be like, strike it. It's kind of similar of like when you're doing self-submissions and you get the name of the casting director wrong, it's like, well, no, just don't give them an excuse to dismiss your application because of something technical, like not getting your maths right in your budget and not having clear milestones. I didn't find that particularly difficult. Actually, milestones I did find difficult because there wasn't like a completed thing at the end. So that took me a while to figure out, okay, how can I break my idea of a project into things that are like quantifiable milestones. The budgeting I found fine because I'm quite good with numbers and that kind of stuff. But if you're someone who struggles with numbers, accounting, budgeting, then get someone to help you with that, because like that has to be spot on. Also on budgeting, what I will say is like, don't be scared of asking for money. And I think this is something that, because you're basically being like, especially with a DYCP, you're being like, just give me money to do art and figure out how to do this. And that can feel really exposing, and it can feel like, why do I deserve this money when lots of other people could have it or whatever. But especially when it comes to paying yourself, the Arts Council encourages you to budget for paying yourself for your time. So don't be afraid of doing that. And they even encourage you to borrow more money rather than less. I think one of the things in the guidance was like, we can fund £2,000 for you to do some research for a potential future project, but that money is only going to one person for one project. They'd much rather you apply for, I don't know, £7,000 and be like, I'm getting all of this mentoring, so I'm paying all of these creative people, I'm paying myself for my own time, and this mentoring could then lead to 3 or 4 other projects because it's more of a foundational thing. Or these networking opportunities could then lead to me putting on shows at 3 or 4 venues. Do you see what I mean? They'd rather spend more money on projects that will lead to more things in the future rather than having a small amount of money that probably will get a much smaller reward in the long run. Does that make sense? So don't be afraid of asking for money is basically what that bit of advice is. It can feel really daunting, it can feel really scary, but as long as you can justify your costs, then it's fine. And that's the same with project funding as well. So one of the people who I spoke to who had more experience with project grants applications, they wanted to pay some actors for a 2-week R&D, research and development. Equity minimum is like 400 and something. They requested 600 and something a week for their actors, which is way above equity minimum. And they got it because they could justify the cost. So yeah, just don't be afraid of asking for money. They have it. They want to give it away. So that is what my experience of applying for Arts Council funding was like. Sort of in a nutshell, a little bit of a rambly nutshell, but a nutshell nonetheless. In terms of now, so I started my project in November, so I don't know when you're seeing this, but I'm filming this in January. So it's been going for a few months now. I say a few months, a few weeks, a month and a bit, maybe 2 months. My brain, oh my goodness. I don't know when you'll see this. I think you'll probably see this once I'm back from tour, but when I'm filming this, I start back in rehearsals in like 5 days, and then I'm away in just over a week. So yeah, everything's a little bit mental, but I feel like I'm learning so much. It's kind of, I feel like it's a similar experience, me doing this writing project, to when I went to drama school, of like just things clicking into place, of being like, oh, that's why this doesn't work, and that's the thing that I was missing, you know, and that just feels really, really good. I didn't mention this before, but one of the things is if you're doing a more kind of educational project, in terms of you're learning a new skill or learning new tools for your skill or whatever, it can't be just like a pre-existing course. It has to be tailored to you, hence with the mentoring. So like I'm working one-to-one with someone, we've had a discussion and devised together kind of a course for me based on what I want to deal with and what they feel would be beneficial for me, if that makes sense. But the great thing about that is like there's things that I worry about or things that I find difficult, and we can really work on those things. So I know that it's not an academic course, I know it's practical, I know that we're going to be touching the bases that I want to touch, and if there's specific questions that I have, I'm free to ask them because it's fully my time. So it's just been really great so far, and I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, here's to what the rest of the project has in store for me. And yeah, that's all I want to say. I'm going to stop filming because I need lunch. So I hope you enjoyed this video, or that you found it helpful. Like I said, I'll link the article I wrote below. If you have any questions about the DYCP or about Arts Council funding in general, check out that article, or feel free to ask me in the comments. And yeah, if you liked this video or found it helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. Would love to have you on the channel. Come on down. Stay tuned for more theatre content from a UK perspective, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye, friends!